Hey guys, Icy here. So almost a year ago, I did a full-on guide on how I build my PvP healers, and if you've seen a lot of my build videos, I've been fairly consistent with that formula for the simple reason of I've had a lot of success with it. However, recently I've gained new knowledge and have made some slight alterations on how I'm building my healers going forward in order to adapt to the new meta of hybridization and very high weapon and spell damage builds. Be sure to check the description for timestamps if you're only looking for particular stuff, but if you're new to PvP or PvP healing, it might be worth watching the whole video. So let's jump into it. Alright, so I have three formulas that I use when I design all of my PvP healer builds. Formula 1 is a 2-piece monster set, 5-piece heavy armor set, and a 5 light armor set that I put on my weapons and jewelry. The second formula is a 1-piece monster set, typically the shoulders, with 1 mythic, then a 5-piece heavy armor set on the body, and then a 5-piece light armor set that's for the weapons and jewelry. And then the third formula is a 2-piece monster set with 1 mythic, and then a light armor set that I use for my front bar, and then a heavy armor set that I place on my back bar. Now all these can be run in all of the different modes available for PvP. Only thing that will matter is what actual sets you want to bring to the table if you are trying to optimize with what your team already has. Now for the champion points, this will be for the Imperial City, Imperial Sewers, and Cyrodiil CP campaigns. I now have a general rule I've set for myself regarding equipping CP nodes in the warfare tree. The first part is I always use resilience because I don't get any other form of crit resistance aside from the base of 1320. The second part depends on what my armor looks like when I'm fully buffed up. If I'm overcapped on my armor, which is over 33k, then I'll always use 3 of the healing nodes. If I'm over 30k but not hitting the cap, then I'll do 2 healing nodes and 1 mitigation node. If I'm between 25k and 30k, then I'll do 1 healing node and 2 mitigation nodes. And if I'm less than 25k, then I'll do 0 healing and 3 mitigation nodes. Now if you notice, the lower my armor got, the more I wanted to invest in flat damage mitigation. This is because as my armor lowers, I'll naturally take more damage, and I want to be able to mitigate a large percentage of that high damage. My choice of healing nodes always depends on the build I'm running: focused mending, swift renewal, soothing tide, and fighting finesse. My choice of damage mitigation nodes always depends on what I'm afraid of: ironclad, unassailable, bulwark, enduring resolve, duelist rebuff. In the fitness tree, I always use celerity, boundless vitality, and fortified. The fourth slot is personal preference, and I usually pick something to synergize with my build or team comp, so you can pick whatever you want here. Now for the weights, I typically do a 5 heavy and 2 medium setup, or a 4 heavy and 3 medium setup. And before somebody's asking, well, how do I know when do I do either setup? You don't. Most times I don't have a choice, because if I'm doing a Formula 1 or 2 setup, then that is usually a 5 heavy and 2 medium build. And if I'm doing a front bar back bar setup, that's usually a 4 heavy and 3 medium build. I try to never use light armor on my body because you get more value from the heavy armor and medium armor passives than you do with the light armor, and I actually did a video talking more about it, and I'll be sure to leave a link in the description so you can go check it out. Now for the armor traits and enchants, I've been running a full 7 sturdy setup for the last year, and it's been really great since blocking provides a huge amount of damage mitigation for you. However, when I created my debuff support on my warden, link in the description below, I actually decided to not run sturdy and just go with a combination of reinforced and nerd hone, link in the description below. It was a different style of play since I wasn't blocking as much, and instead choosing to rely on mitigating damage while being capped at max armor. And because of that experiment, it opened my eyes to the idea that your traits should always reflect your style of play. So I don't really expect anyone to run a full 7 sturdy setup. If you like to mitigate damage with roll dodging, just make sure you invest in well fitted. Now for the enchants, there is no change here. I always have and always will do a 7 prismatic enchant setup. When you play a PvP healer, your health, magicka, and stamina are all being used, so I make sure to invest in all 3 when selecting my enchants. For the jewelry traits and enchants, I've always done a 3 infused setup with magicka recovery on my necklace and ring 1, followed by stamina recovery on ring 2. Nowadays, I am much more appreciative of movement speed, and now have a new rule that I set up for myself on when I choose to use either infused or swift. For my stamina recovery on ring 2, I now always use a swift trait. I like to have my stamina recovery at 1000, and this can be achieved when being fully buffed up with the major endurance that you get from your tri-stat potion and not using infused on your ring 2 slot. For the magicka recovery on your necklace and ring 1, it depends on the light armor set. What I do now is for every line of magicka recovery the set has, I'll use a swift trait. For a quick example on what I mean, if I'm using spell power cure, then I'll use a 2 infused trait since that light armor set has no lines of magicka recovery. If I was wearing gossamer, then I would use 1 infused trait on my necklace and 1 swift Swift trait on my ring 1 because there is only one line of magical recovery on that set. And if I was using transmutation, then I would use 2 Swift traits, one on my necklace and ring 1, since there are already 2 lines of magical recovery on that set. Now, since we are trading a little bit of magical recovery for our movement speed, this technically lowers our sustain, but because heavy attacking is a staple on how I play as a healer, I never had any issue with it. Now, for the weapon traits and enchants, on the front bar, it will always be a restoration staff with either a powered or precise trait, depending on the build. We always use a weapon damage enchant to help boost our heals. On the back bar, we have 2 options. For the sword and board, I always do a defending trait on the sword with an absorb stamina enchant, and on the shield, I have a sturdy trait with a prismatic enchant. The absorb stamina enchant on the sword is just personal preference. The only time I ever hit someone with it is when I need to do a heavy attack to get more stamina, so I always figured, let me just get a little bit more stamina back when I do that. For the frost staff, I use a charge trait with a frost enchant. The charge trait helps me proc the chilled stats effect very often. If you're not familiar with that stats effect, it will place the minor maim debuff on your enemies, lowering their damage done by 5%. And if you have a frost enchant equipped to your frost staff, this will give your chilled stats effect a second debuff called minor brittle, causing your enemies to take 10% more critical damage. Now for the food options, I always use the legendary bewitched sugar skulls for the max stats and health recovery. However, if you are too cheap and would like an alternative, you can always go with the longfin pasty with melon sauce or the crown fortifying meals. The max stats are very similar, but you lose the health recovery, and since we aren't a healer, health recovery isn't really that important. Now for the attributes and max stats, they go hand in hand because you want to put just enough points into each attribute to reach the ideal max stat you are aiming for. This will vary on a per build basis. My stamina preference is always between 18 to 20k. I never really have to put any points into stamina because it's covered by my prismatic enchants on all of my armor pieces. There are some moments when I'm going over 20k because of racial passives or the actual set themselves, and that's okay too. My magical preference used to be 28 to 30k, now it's set to 25k. I found this to be a nice sweet spot where I can still get everything I need done because of my playstyle naturally has a lot of heavy attacks that I weave in every 1 to 3 abilities, coupled with magical regen, generally around 1500 plus whenever I am fully buffed up. Conversely, since I am putting less points into my magical attribute, this allows me to dump the rest of it into the health, giving me a base of 35k health minimum on all of my builds, and depending on the racial passive and sets, as well as getting minor toughness from a warden, you could see yourself over 40k on a healer, which is really solid.
Nice.
And lastly, for the Mundus, this will usually depend on the build I'm running, but my default option is always to pick the ritual to help increase my healing done. I think most people like to do the Atronach for magical recovery, but my sustain has always been in a good spot, so I never had a reason to use it. Now, what sets can you run with this? Literally anything you want. I've got a bunch of build videos on my channel as examples that you can scavenge through. Just make sure to apply this new template and you should be in good shape. All right, that is the end of the video. Let me know what you guys thought, or if you have any PvP healer questions you'd like me to answer. See ya.